self-quarantine 2020. Um, yeah, what I wanted to talk about today is something I've been wanting to do for a little while, and I just thought maybe I'd move this up my list of things to do because it's for those of you who can't go to band and trying to figure out what to do with your instrument practice. I want to basically go over some of the things that I suggest to practice, or for my students to practice, uh, so that you have a better idea of maybe some things you can work on during this time when you don't have band rehearsals or whatever the case may be. So you can really help, maybe hopefully fine tune, and after this is over, be even a better musician than when all this started. And I'm going to break it down into some categories here as I talk about different things. And this is a little bit different than what I do with my private students, but bear with me. The first thing I like to talk about is fundamentals, especially the first part is like sound fundamentals, making sure we're doing the things that help us to sound good. Now, one of the things I've found with saxophone students especially, clarinets to some degree, but I think saxophone players are some of the worst musicians when it comes to working on fundamentals, because really it's fairly easy to get a good sound on saxophone. But if we take some time to fine tune what we do and really focus on it and practice it, that's going to put us a leg up above other musicians if we're working on these fundamentals. They're not the funnest things in the world, and I wish we didn't have to do these things, but these are what I found. If you really want to get ahead in the game, if you work on these things, that will help. The first thing is basically working on our tone. I like to put a lot of focus on tone quality. And I've already done some other videos, so I'm not going to go into details here, but if you want to look at some of my other videos to get more information on these different topics, you can. There's a few things I still need to do videos for that I'm going to hopefully work on in the next few weeks. But starting off, most basic long tones. I break it down into two main categories. There's the straight long tones and dynamic long tones. Straight, where you just take a good full breath and then push the air out and just play a long steady note as long as you can, and do several of those a day. And then of course dynamic long tones, where we work on being able to change, go from soft to loud back to soft again, and be able to keep control not only the tone but the pitch, because the pitch will change. And just one little quick thing for working with the pitch is on the saxophone and clarinet, we want to be more focused with the embouchure when we play soft and just kind of loosen it up a little bit more. We don't want to think tight or anything, but we want to just be more firm for the soft and a little bit more loose or open for the loud. So listen for that. Doing long tones with a tuner is also going to be very important, whether it's on your phone or a regular external tuner or on your computer, however it is that you can tune, use those tools. Now, I've also recently done some videos on mouthpiece pitch, and we talked about the different pitches there for the different saxes and for clarinet. So soprano sax and clarinet are C concert that we want to get on just the mouthpiece. Sax or alto sax is A concert, tenor sax is G concert, and bass sax is D concert. And most saxophone players have a tendency to be a little bit on the high side, so we have to learn to open up to get those pitches down. Clarinet players tend to be on the low side. They have to learn to firm things up and focus the oral cavity so you can get up to the C. So anyway, I talk more about that in another video. And then kind of related to that, because how we want to bring that pitch down is by learning how to open up our throat muscles. And so there's the palm D flexibility or the palm F flexibility for alto and then tenor, or I just use high C for clarinet. So anyway, I talk more about that. And then overtones, which again, I have a video on that as well. Basically the bugle notes, like if you can do the bugle taps and reveille and things like that, are the overtone series that we can do on saxophone and clarinet. Another thing I spend a lot of time on with my private students is tonguing. And I've got a video out there. It's an old one. I probably need to do a new one of these days. But is where I talk about the actual things that we need to be working on. But basically, first working to see if you can do quarter notes and without the extra sound, without the extra sound in there, or the dead spots and things like that. Making sure that we're just denting the sound and not completely stopping the reed. And then working maybe do quarter notes and eighth notes, and then maybe eighth notes or just eighth notes, and eighth notes and sixteenths, and then working on sixteenths and speeding up it with a metronome. Another thing for working on tone, which for saxophone is an essential thing, and I just did a video on this as well, is vibrato. So that'd be something else you can spend some time practicing. Altissimo for saxophone and clarinet players would be a good time to work on getting those high notes and doing them correctly. I got a video on it for saxophone. Clarinet, it's mainly just making sure you get the firm lower lip and the oral cavity shape correct. Now the second stage, so that was stage one, which is the sound fundamentals. The second stage is technique fundamentals. And so that's, basically are things like scales. So this is a great time to work on your scales. If you don't know all 12 major scales, get those learned. And see if you can get to the point where you can play all 12 of them in under a minute. That'd be a good, so if you're not to that point yet, challenge yourself to do that. Do them from memory. Don't use scale sheets if you can help it. You can use it as a reference, but try to do this from memory as much as possible. Try to be as clean as you can with your technique. Don't let little glitches and things, if you make a mistake on a scale, make sure you correct it, and maybe even multiple times, because we want to make sure when you practice something, this goes for anything, scales, songs, whatever, we want to make sure we play it right way more times when we play it wrong. So especially scales I like because they're a small enough and controllable enough unit that we can challenge ourselves to play those 100% correctly, and that will carry over into our other playing if we do that. And of course, and if you know your scales pretty well, the next step I suggest for people to do is like to do scales full range. So if I do a G scale full range on alto sax, I'd start on G. Where I go as high as I can in the key, so in this case I went up to F sharp, and as low as I can in the key, down to low B, and then back up to the G again, where I started. Doing that with all 12 keys, that gets us working on the extreme ends of the instrument that we don't normally work on as much. Of course, doing arpeggios. If we're doing classical arpeggios, you might go 1, 3, 5, 1. If you're doing jazz arpeggios, 1, 3, 5, 7, 9 is usually what I recommend. And of course, getting into the other scales. For classical players, it would be very good to get into doing and learning the classical minors, learning how to figure out and how it relates to the major scales for the natural minor and the harmonic minor and the melodic minor. And that'll also help jazz players too to learn those scales. So it's not just for classical cats. But yeah, so make sure to learn those. And there's plenty of other sources on the internet, so I'm not going to go into all that stuff. And of course, there's the jazz scale. Same thing. There's lots of resources on the internet, but learn your mixed Lydian scales, your Dorian, your Locrian, your super Locrian, and there's all sorts of other things like scales beyond that if you really want to go crazy. And of course, even for classical and jazz players, learning your whole tone scale, learning your diminished or your octatonic scales, those will also be of benefit. And if you need one reference I did think about for jazz players at least, there's jazzbooks.com, which is Jamie Aebersold's website, and there's a tab on there where you can, I think it says free jazz, and then you can click on the jazz handbook, and it goes into some theory things. So that'd be some good theory stuff you could work through to fine tune your jazz knowledge and improve your scales. Okay, then the third stage is, of course, working on method books. For my private students right now, I'm working on changing things, but right now I start them off beginners using a new tune a day, which I like that because it has a CD with it, a play-along CD, so you can work with playing that, and so you got the auditory examples you can listen to. And this is for clarinet and sax. Then when they finish those books, I then usually move them on to the Advanced Rubank series. So the Advanced Method is what it's called. And it's volume 1, volume 2, and I usually take them through both of those volumes. And then after that, for the sax students, I take them to the Fairling 48 famous studies. And there's different versions. There's the oboe version, which works for saxophone as well. But there's also one that's written for saxophone, which is kind of nice because it's on a full page instead of half a page, kind of all scrunched down. Of course, then there's the mule version, where he wrote an additional 12 more studies to add to the Fairling 48. So there's all those different studies there you can get, and there's more studies. I mean, this is not comprehensive by any means. So these are just the main ones that I like to use. And then, of course, for clarinet, once you get past the Advanced Rubank, I like to then start working on the Rose studies, especially the Rose 32, which is basically the Fairling, but just modified and adapted by Rose for the clarinet. Oh, one thing I should say about if you maybe you don't have access to some of these method books and studies, there's a website called imslp.org that has a lot of the stuff that's in the public domain. So it's older stuff. Sometimes it's in another language, but there's plenty of musical materials there. There's solo pieces as well as some method books. Maybe a little bit better for clarinet than for sax, but there's plenty of materials for both instruments if you're looking for something new to look at. I think even the Fairling might be up on IMSLP if I remember right. And then for jazz players, I like to use the Niehaus Jazz Conception for Saxophone series, and those now come with a CD as well. Then there's, of course, the Aebersold play-alongs, things like that we can do for working on jazz. But something else I found, I'm actually doing this for myself a little bit, is working on doubles. So if you're a clarinet player and you want to, get to the point where you can play sax, this would be a good time maybe to work on that if you can get a hold of one. For me, I'm really trying to fine tune and work on my flute. It's been my weakest area lately, so I've been really trying to work on that. And I'm usually, of course, working on clarinet all the time, but right now I'm trying to, fine tune, improve my Dixieland style playing, because I tend to play more like a modern player, and I'm trying to learn to not be quite as happy and jumping on those flat nines all the time. Anyway, so yeah, they're working on doubles. And so then the next thing, our fourth stage here, would be literature. And for classical players, again, the IMSLP can give you a lot of possibilities for literature. If you don't have any on hand already, there's a lot of collections of books I like to have my students use for solo and ensemble. You can find those at music stores or online or whatever. And then for jazz, of course, our literature a lot of times, things like real books, learning tunes, learning to memorize tunes, transcribing tunes, taking a recording and listening to it and trying to figure it out. And another good thing to do for classical and jazz players is just to find some other material and sight read it. So again, IMSLP for classical, and there's lots of transcribed jazz solos out there. If you just look up if you want to find a specific one or a specific tune, you can type it in and type in PDF or transcription or something like that, and you can probably find plenty of pieces there just for sight reading practice. That'd be a good thing to work on for literature and spending some quality time on. And then something that especially, a lot of us teachers are, of course, transitioning to doing lessons online, but the biggest problem with online lessons is the software compresses the sound and smushes it down. Even if you have a fantastic microphone, by the time it gets to the other side, it's not going to sound good. So I can't really demonstrate things very well. So, you should be doing this anyway, whether you're in quarantine or not, but spending some time listening to the great players and listening to their sound. So YouTube, of course, fantastic resource for that. And if you have these old-fashioned things called CDs or records, you can use those for listening as well. But what's nice about YouTube, especially if you want to get into transcribing, is there's a way to slow it down, by 1/4, 1/2, and then I think by 3/4 are the different options. You can speed it up too if you want, for I don't know what reason, but you can slow it down so you can listen to it a little bit more and find out some of the notes. Because some of these runs, like the Charlie Parker, and I was just working on a solo from Art Pepper, where he goes into this fast run where he plays like 20 notes in a second, something like that. And I can't hear that in regular time, but fortunately I can slow things down and then pick out more of the notes. So anyway, YouTube's a great resource, and then just being able to just listen and hear good quality professional or just good players, even if they're high school level, just whoever can, sounds good and all that, take advantage to listen to some of those things and to learn from them. And then, in all my studying over the years of different ways of practicing, reading several articles on it, there's the sixth stage here is never talked about. And I think it's one of the most important things that we should do when playing music, and that is have fun. I started to play music when I was young because it sounded like fun. It wasn't because, you get to play scales and arpeggios. That was not a big motivator for me at first. But being able to pick up an instrument and play a song that you love and enjoy. And so definitely take some time to do that. And in some ways, if you don't do anything but that, that's way better than nothing. And a lot of times that can help motivate us to get better in other areas. Like that's what happened to me. I probably erred a lot more on the side of having fun when I practiced when I was younger. But then I realized, hey, I want to get better in this. And that's when I started focusing on the fundamentals and doing some of those other things to make me an even better player. So like things, fun songbooks, like Disney songs, Star Wars songs, whatever. There's lots of those songbooks out there. Learning to play songs by ear, which is, I almost hate to say this, but it's also really good for us, especially as jazz musicians, to be able to hear things in our head and be able to translate it out to the instrument. Playing by ear is a great way to learn and develop that, and will help us learn towards being able to transcribe. Composing your own songs, that's something that can be fun too. And then sometimes just putting on a recording and just playing along with it and just goofing off. I've known some great jazz players who did that when they were young. They just thought they were having fun, not realizing that they were also soaking in some great ideas as they were playing around with these recordings. So anyway, there's plenty of things to practice. By no means is this comprehensive. There's plenty of other things that you can do and find, and more subjects, especially in jazz. We can talk about 2-5-1 licks and things like that. But there's plenty of stuff again online, and I might make my own stuff in the future. But mainly it's just be safe, have fun, play music. Music's a great way to help relieve stress for many of us. So that's the main thing I want you to do, is just get out your axe and play. And again, if you have any questions, feel free to email me or put a comment on the bottom of this video. Thanks.